One of the most frustrating things is when your lawnmower or other small engine won't start. In this video, we're going to be looking at simple fixes that anyone with some basic tools can perform. First, we're going to be talking about air filters. If your air filter gets clogged or filled with some kind of debris or dirt, it's not going to get the air it needs to run correctly. Symptoms of this will likely include sputtering or black smoke, and if it got bad enough, it wouldn't even start. Remove the air filter cover and check if it's clean. If the air filter looks pretty clean, such as the one I have here, that's probably not your problem. Although if it is pretty packed with dirt, you can use an air compressor to help blow it out, as well as banging it on something to shake the particles loose. Some air filters you can also wash with soap and water, but this one I think would fall apart because it's a paper filter. Starting fluid is very useful for diagnosing the potential problem with your engine. Spray starting fluid directly into the carburetor and pull the engine over. It should start up for a little bit and then stop. This indicates that the problem you have is a fuel problem. If it were a problem with the electrical system, then the engine would not start at all or would just sputter a little bit. So now you should have a basic idea of whether it's a fueling issue or an electrical issue. Alright, now let's talk about fueling issues for a little bit. So first things first, I would recommend checking the gas and seeing if it has gas in it, because if it doesn't, that's obviously going to cause it not to be able to start. Also, make sure it has good gasoline in it. If it's old and maybe has been sitting outside for a long time, it can start to get water in it and not be able to combust very well anymore. Here you can see the fuel line. This mower does not have a fuel shutoff, but if yours does, make sure that the fuel shutoff is in the on position. Make sure that there is good fuel flow through the fuel lines. If there is no flow or very little, you can undo the fuel line and blow WD-40 and compressed air through it to clear any blockages. Although I would not recommend using brake cleaner because that can dissolve the rubber fuel lines. It is very possible that your carburetor jet got clogged. In fact, that's one of the main problems I see in lawnmower engines. So in order to unclog the jet or emulsion tube, you're going to need to take off the air filter adapter, which is what I'm doing now. I would next recommend disconnecting the fuel line from the carburetor and draining the gas into a separate container. Next, you're going to need to drop the bowl of the carburetor. Usually there's a bolt holding the bowl on, and so you'll need to unscrew that. And it's good to have some form of catch container because it will drain gas that was sitting in the bowl out. If there is any sediment at the bottom of the bowl, make sure and clean it out before putting the bowl back on. A great tool for cleaning out carburetor jets is a torch tip cleaner. So they have these little tiny wires that you can use to poke up through the jet or the emulsion tube, and you can see it coming out the top of the emulsion tube there, and that ensures that you have a clear passageway through which fuel can flow. As I mentioned before, make sure the bowl is clean and does not have any sediment in it. When you're reinstalling the bowl, make sure that the bowl gasket is in the correct position and is not broken in any area, otherwise you'll have a fuel leak. Also, the bolt that holds the bowl on has some passageways in it, so make sure that those are also clear. If cleaning the jet didn't do it, and the engine still does not run correctly, or not at all, then you're going to need to fully remove the carburetor. You'll need to disconnect the choke arm as well as the throttle linkage. For the purposes of demonstrating, I'm going to be using a different carburetor. On the front side, you can see the choke valve. That should be moving freely and working correctly. On the other side, you can see the throttle valve. You will need to once again remove the bowl. Inside, you will see the float mechanism. The white thing that can move up and down is the float. There's a little pin that holds it in place. If you remove that, you should be able to lift the float mechanism out. And connected to it will be the needle valve, which is this little piece I'm holding right here. That goes into this hole and allows fuel to fill up the bowl. You can soak the carburetor assembly in carburetor cleaner or gasoline. Alternatively, you can use brake cleaner to spray through all the ports and fuel passageways to clear them of any debris, and then use compressed air to thoroughly blow them out and make sure that they can flow freely. When you reassemble the carburetor, make sure the needle valve and float are working correctly. Before you put the carburetor back on, make sure the gasket between the carburetor and the intake manifold is properly positioned. This engine has an O-ring instead of a gasket, but the same principle applies. You can see the go-kart engine has an intake gasket. In fact, it has two of them. Now we're going to talk about electrical and spark issues. Of course, make sure all the kill switches are in the on position. And with a mower like this, the handle needs to be depressed in order for electricity to even go to the spark plug. So for these tests, I would recommend tying the handle down. You can see how the mechanism works here. The spring pulls it into the off position if you don't hold it down. The next thing we're going to do is check if the problem is with the spark plug or with the coils. To do that, we're going to need to remove the spark plug. You can see this spark plug has quite a bit of carbon buildup on it, but it should still work. Reinsert the spark plug into the spark plug wire. Then you want to touch the metal part of the spark plug to some metal part on the engine and pull the engine over, and you should see sparking. If you don't see sparking, you want to test if it's a problem with your spark plug or the coils. So to do that, stick a screwdriver into the spark plug wire and hold it close to the metal on the engine, and then pull it over, and you should see it arcing to the metal. If you don't, that means your coils are bad. To check the coils, you're going to need to take the blower housing off of the engine. This will expose the flywheel and the coils, which is what generates the electricity for the spark plug. You can see here are the coils, and the flywheel has a magnet on it that spins around, and that's right here, and each time that magnet goes by the coil produces an electric pulse which travels to the spark plug, allowing it to produce spark. The coil gap for this kind of lawnmower engine should be around 12 thousandths of an inch. I found that a piece of paper folded over twice, or 4 layers of paper, is about the right thickness, and you can use it as a gauge. And if you can fit it in between the coil and the flywheel, that's a good indication that you have the right gap. If not, you can break these nuts loose and slide the coil forward or backward to get it to the correct gap. Now it's worth mentioning that after you've adjusted the coils, if you still don't get a strong spark or any spark when you try the screwdriver spark test, then that's a good indication that your coils are junk and you need to get new ones. What if you have determined that it is a spark plug problem? How can you fix that? What you can do is clean between the electrodes on the spark plug with some fine sandpaper. It doesn't take much, just enough to expose the bare metal on both sides. Also make sure the strap is not bent too far away at a funny angle or touching the other electrode. If it is bent, you can straighten it out so the distance between the strap and the bottom electrode is about the thickness of a credit card. It's also rare but possible that the timing could be off because the flywheel key is sheared. In this case, you'll need to take off the flywheel and replace the key. This is best done with an impact. We've covered fuel and spark, so now let's talk about lack of compression. This is something that can cause engines to be very difficult to start. A way to test compression is by spinning over your engine manually, and there should be a real tough spot every other rotation, as I'm demonstrating. If there is no tough spot or it's very weak, that's a sign of low compression. One of the main causes for compression loss is poor valve seating. So what you'll need to do to check the valves is remove the head. This is easiest done with an impact, although you can do it with a regular wrench as well. What you want to do is rotate the engine till one of the valves is open, and then look around the edge of the valve for a kind of shiny ring, and this is where you should get good contact. There should also be a shiny ring on the inside of the block where the valve contacts. If you don't see any shiny ring and there's lots of carbon buildup around the valve seat, you may need to clean it out with a wire brush. And if it's so bad that the valve does not sit correctly anymore, you may need to regrind the valves with some valve grinding paste. Before you put the head back on, make sure that the head gasket is intact and not ripped in any place, because that can also cause compression loss. The torque specs for this Briggs & Stratton flathead are a little hard to find, but from my research, I found that it's supposed to be around 12 foot-pounds. I thought that was a little low, but I would say somewhere around 15 foot-pounds would be good. Another way in which you can lose compression is through bad rings. This is not a super good drawing, but it allows you to see where the rings are. So these are the rings on the piston. And when you have combustion pressure, what ends up happening is some of this combustion pressure seeps past the rings because they're no longer getting a good seal with the cylinder wall. This will allow your engine to lose some compression as well as pressurizing the crankcase, which causes blow-by. If your engine has bad rings, it will likely start and run, it'll just have blow-by and smoke as it's burning oil. Although smoke does not always mean bad rings. Your engine could be smoking because it got some oil in the intake through the air filter, or because the muffler has oil in it and it's burning it off. Although generally, if the smoke does not clear up in a little while of running, it is most certainly blow-by caused by bad rings and a worn-out cylinder bore. There are ways to fix this by replacing the rings and rehoning the cylinder, although that requires more extensive tools and knowledge to fix and is a little beyond the scope of this video. I would say if your small engine has a lot of blow-by and doesn't run very good, it's not worth fixing. It's better just to get a brand new engine. The final engine problem we'll be talking about is the case of the locked up engine. In this video clip I was working on a compressor, but the principles still apply. The engine could be locked up due to water getting into the cylinder and causing rust, which would freeze the piston in place. To fix this, you'll first need to remove the head from the engine. One thing you can do is spray WD-40 or any kind of penetrating oil into the cylinder, which will help loosen up the rust. You can also pour some rust-dissolving solution into the cylinder and let it sit for a couple of hours. You may want to change the oil after this though, because the rust removal fluid can seep past the rings and into the crankcase and contaminate your oil. To help get the piston moving freely again, one thing you can do is tap on the piston with a block of wood and a hammer to help move it down. Now I just need to work it. Once you have the piston moving a little bit, you can use the flywheel for a mechanical advantage to spin over the engine and try to work over the hard spots. Once the engine can rotate somewhat, you can clean up the rust a little bit on the cylinder wall with a wire brush or some steel wool. Fine sandpaper could also work. You just have to be careful not to remove too much material, which will cause the rings to have a poor seal. In summary, we covered checking air filter, starting fluid tests, fuel issues, electrical/spark issues, lack of compression, and even engine lockup. Now, I did not even mention all the issues that are possible. I just mentioned the most common ones that are relatively simple to fix. A lot of the fixes and principles mentioned in this video apply not only to lawnmower engines, but to any small engine, go-kart, snowblower, etc. I hope you learned something from this video and are able to take away some key points so that way if your mower ever breaks down, you don't have to call some guy like me to come and fix it, because you can do it yourself. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.